Hello, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. My name is Chad Ragsdale, and I'm glad that you've taken out some time to talk about this important issue. I'm the Assistant Academic Dean here at Ozark, and I also teach in the areas of philosophy and apologetics primarily. I want to give you a little bit of background on the topic and why I'm so personally passionate about this topic. So I've been in a doctoral program that I just finished in the fall for the past 3 to 4 years. And the topic of my dissertation was theology and technology, essentially. And I became interested in this topic for at least a couple of reasons. One reason is, here at Ozark, we want to prepare our students as well as we possibly can to be ministers of the gospel in our world. And a part of that is obviously we've got to know scripture and we've got to know the principles of doing ministry well, but we also have to know our culture really well. We have to be able to navigate the trends and the tendencies of the various places that we find ourselves. And I had this burden for our students that we're sending them out into the world. We're sending them out to do ministry in a very technological, digital world where every single day we live our lives intimately with digital technologies. And I began to feel like in order to prepare students for ministry in this culture, we've got to really learn to think theologically. We have to learn to think philosophically about the various digital technologies that are so intimately involved in our lives. And so that was one piece of it. The other piece of it was personal. In my own life, I recognize the pervasive influence of various digital technologies, especially smartphones, social media, things like that. And so I just wanted to study it kind of for my own benefit, just to learn a little bit about what types of things, or how rather is digital technology shaping me? How is it shaping me as an individual? How is it shaping me as a disciple of Jesus? And so I just had this personal curiosity about this topic, and so I hope that you find the next hour that we spend together beneficial. I'm going to try to get through my presentation with about 10 minutes to spare roundabout, so that if there are any questions or comments, we could have that interaction towards the end of the webinar. This is an urgent topic for us. And I think that if you're watching this afternoon, you probably recognize that. You probably know that. But especially in the era of COVID over the last, 12 months or so, our relationship with digital technology has gone into hyperdrive. So church went online. Schools went online, businesses went online, and everybody, or a lot of people rather, started working from home rather than being in the same physical presence as our loved ones. We chose to be in a digital or a virtual presence of a loved one through FaceTime or social media or whatever the case may be. So our relationship with these digital technologies, we already had a very intimate relationship with these technologies, but over the last year, again, everything has just gone into hyperdrive. So it's more urgent than ever that we talk about this topic. Pre-COVID, the average American teenager spent around 7 hours and 20 minutes every single day in front of a screen. Now, a lot of times that screen was their phone. Sometimes it was the TV or the computer, but 7 hours and 20 minutes in front of a screen. By contrast, the average American teenager spent a little bit less than 30 minutes every day actually reading. So we're spending a ton of time with these digital technologies. About half of American teenagers, when they were surveyed, about half said that they felt physically addicted to their phones, that when the phone wasn't in their presence, they got anxious, they got nervous, they got antsy. So about 50%, 36% of American teenagers wake up at least once every single night just to check their phones to see if they've gotten any messages or alerts during the night. In one particular study, which was just shocking to me, this was in 2018, it found that 23%, so almost 1 out of 4 young adults would give up one of their senses, one of their 5 senses, rather than to give up their phone. 10% said that they would sacrifice one of their fingers rather than sacrifice their phone. And these are all pre-COVID statistics. So you can imagine what's happened in the last year in regards to our relationship with digital technology. And so it's urgent for us in the church to think about this well, to think about this from a biblical perspective, and to think about, the various ways that our digital technology, and when I use that phrase, I'm talking specifically about smartphones, social media, that sort of digital technology. How is that changing us? And so I want to go through this presentation here and just point out initially three preliminary laws of technology that we have to think through. Okay, 3 preliminary laws of technology. So if we're going to think well about technology, we've got to recognize these 3 laws. The first law is this, that you are what you worship. You are what you worship. And this is a scriptural idea. The prophets talked about this idea. There's a passage in 2 Kings 17 makes this same point, as Israel was following the false gods, as Israel was as they were giving themselves over to idols. They are warned by the prophets that they were to worship a worthless idol makes you also worthless, just like that idol. So you become like that which you worship. They gave themselves over to worthless things, and they themselves became worthless as a result. So you become like that which you worship. In regards to our discipleship with Jesus, the same principle holds true. So you could think about a passage like Romans 8, where Paul says, God uses all things for our good, for those who have been called according to his purpose. But then in the very next verse, in Romans 8:29, Paul tells us what God's purpose is for our lives. He says that it's God's will, it's God's purpose that we be conformed to the likeness of his son. In other words, there is this growing resemblance between who we are and who Jesus is. We think like Jesus, we talk like Jesus, we treat other people the way that Jesus would have us treat them. So that discipleship is, taking up our cross daily, following Jesus, and growing into his likeness. So the discipleship principle, I guess, in scripture is you become like that which you worship. Whatever you put at the center of your being, whatever you put at the center of your life, you're going to start to look like that thing. And the way that I've come to express this is with a formula. The formula is time plus proximity plus imitation leads to a shared resemblance. Time plus proximity plus imitation lead to a shared resemblance. The longer you're with a person, the longer you imitate that person, the more you'll start to look like them. Now, I don't think that we're worshiping technology, at least not formally. We're not worshiping technology. But we do live in a culture where we are always on and always connected. So technology has been grafted into our lives intimately. So it's hard for us to imagine, it's hard for us to remember sometimes what our life was like before our smartphones, what our life was like before social media. That's how much this technology has been grafted into our experience. So we may not formally be worshiping digital technology, but we have to a great degree placed it kind of at the center of our daily lives. Unwittingly, unknowingly, we've placed it at the center of our lives. And if it's true that time plus proximity plus imitation lead to a shared resemblance, if that's true, then we probably should seriously reflect on the way that technology is shaping us into its likeness. the way that our digital technology, our social media, for instance, is shaping us into being a particular type of person. We also should probably reflect on whether or not that formation allows us to look more like Jesus, or whether that formation from technology actually makes it harder for us to look like Jesus. Here's the second principle. The second principle, or the second law, I guess, is that the tool uses you. There's basically two major theories on technology. One, and I won't go into too great a detail on this, but one theory of technology is the instrumental view, that technology simply are the tools that we use, and we could use those either for good or we could use those for evil, but it's an instrumental sort of understanding of technology, that technology, it's simply the tools that are at our disposal, the tools that we use to kind of make something of this world. The other understanding of technology is that technology actually isn't neutral. But when you use technology in some way or another, that technology actually shapes you. That technology actually changes you in some maybe indiscernible way. That technology changes you. So take a simple tool like a hammer. You can instrumentally use a hammer to drive in a nail. But in doing so, that hammer is changing something about you. It's changing something about your assumptions about what is possible or what's impossible. It's changing what you think in terms of your abilities or your inabilities. So the hammer is sort of reframing your imagination. The hammer is changing, in some respects, the way that you see and understand the world. And every tool and every technology is like that. The technology that I'm surrounded with in this room right now, lights, cameras, microphones, computers, all this technology to some way or another is technology that I'm using instrumentally, but it's also changing the way that I think. It's changing the way that the assumptions that I make about what is possible or what's impossible. And so one of the key things for us to understand is that the tools that we adopt, they will change us. They will change, again, the way that we see the world, the way that we understand our lives, the way that we understand what's possible. The tools will change us. You know, one Marshall McLuhan, who wrote a lot on this type of topic, he famously said that the medium is the message. The medium is the message, and what he meant by that is, you know, it's sometimes we focus for it. He talked about televisions a lot. That was the kind of the new technology in his day, or the technology rather that was taking over in his day. And he said, you know, sometimes we focus so much about what's on the TV that we fail to really reflect on the TV itself and how the TV itself shapes our experience. The TV itself shapes the way that we understand our lives, the way that we see the world. Like, it's not so much what's on the TV, it's the TV itself that we need to be thinking about. The medium is the message. The medium is the message. And so think in terms of online church. That's a hot topic today, right? Churches are trying to figure out now. We've spent this last year in this pandemic. We've done church online, or we've worshiped online. But now a lot of churches are starting to think through, okay, what comes next? How do we go about coming back into the church building? What do we do with our online service? Do we leave it? Do we abandon it? Like, everybody's kind of asking those questions, right? And it's led some people to conclude that, you know, it doesn't really matter if you're participating in a worship service through your computer, if you're participating in a worship service live and in person, it doesn't really matter. It's the same worship service. But of course, I think most of us recognize that that's not in fact true, that you can have the same worship service on a computer screen that you also experience live and in person. And it could be the same songs, the same sermon, the same everything. But they are nevertheless two very different experiences. They're two very different things to see a service on screen or in person. And so McLuhan would say, we're naive to think that technology doesn't change things. We're naive to think that putting church online doesn't change the nature of what it means to be the church, or the nature of what it means to worship. These are the types of things that we need to be thinking about. Here's the third law. The third law is the difference between growth and conformity is your brain. I am not anti-technology. Sometimes I get accused of that because I've done this type of study, but I'm not anti-technology. I'm not anti-smartphone. I'm not anti-social media. I think we just need to think about it more. I think that we need to engage these technologies with our brains, and we need to engage these technologies from a biblical worldview, because a technology gains its most power over us when we cease thinking about it. When we don't think about technology, it just becomes ingrained in our lives. That's when it has the most power over us. So when we stop thinking about social media, when we stop thinking about our smartphones, that's when it really exerts its greatest influence over us. And so what I'm saying is we need to actually think about these things, and we need to think about them well. We need to think about them biblically. And so I want to talk through, if it's true that digital technologies change us, that digital technologies shape us to look like their image. If we take that as true, I think that it's good for us to ask the follow-up question, well, what kind of person does our technology create? So what kind of person is our technology? And again, when I say technology, I'm talking primarily digital technology, things like smartphones, social media. What kind of person is this technology working to create? And so I have several different ideas that I want to put past you about what kind of person our digital technology is creating. First of all, it's creating distracted people. This is a quote from a book on Generation Z, or iGen. It was written by Jean Twenge is her name. And I love this book. It's an important book. If you work with kids, if you have kids, it's a really important book. But she talks about the influence of technology quite a bit in her book. And so she talks about this research that was done on undergraduate students at the University of California, San Diego, gave them 2 standard tests of intellectual acuity. One test gauged available cognitive capacity, a measure of how fully a person's mind can focus on a particular task. The second assessed fluid intelligence, a person's ability to interpret and solve an unfamiliar problem. The only variable in the experiment was the location of the subject's smartphones. Some of the students were asked to place their phones in front of them on their desk. Others were told to stow their phones in their pockets or their handbags. Still others were required to leave their phones in a different room. The results were striking. In both tests, the subjects whose phones were in view posted the worst scores, while those who left their phones in a different room did the best. The students who kept their phones in their pockets or bags came out in the middle. As the phone's proximity increased, brain power decreased. To me, this is amazing. So what this study found is that the mere presence of your phone is a distraction for you. Just to have your phone in the same room with you, it allows you to be distracted. Your phone is engineered to distract you. Now, the problem with this, when it comes to Christian discipleship, is that discipleship requires meditation. It requires reflection. Discipleship requires, if I could use this word, it requires a little bit of boredom, a little bit of time just to think, a little bit of time of quiet. Right? I mean, if we're really going to grow in the things of God, I mean, spiritual leaders throughout history have told us what's important. We need regular moments of quiet, regular moments of solitude with no distraction. But the problem is we live in a world where we are always on, always connected, and therefore always distracted. So when's the last time that you were standing in a line, a long line, and you just sat there and decided to be bored instead of getting your phone out and scrolling through your phone mindlessly? We don't know how to be bored. All we know is how to be distracted. And this is discipling us. It's shaping us in a particular way to always crave that type of distraction, where we're always flitting from one thing to another. We're checking this urgent push notification. We're checking our email. We're checking our social media. We're checking all these things incessantly. And listen, I'm in the same boat. But we're learning to be distracted instead of learning how to be focused and how to be meditative. But this is the type of person that our digital technology is creating. It's also creating a depressed person. It's creating a depressed person. This also actually, the last slide was from Nicholas Carr. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. That was Nicholas Carr. He wrote a book called The Shallows, which is a really, really good book on how the internet is actually changing our brains. It's a sobering book. But these are actually from Twangy's book. But she talks about eighth graders who are heavy users of social media increase their risk of depression by 27%, while those who play sports, go to religious services, or even do their homework cut their risk significantly. In the same book, she talks about a randomly assigned study among Danish adults. They asked them to stop using Facebook for a week. Or to continue using Facebook as usual. At the end of the week, those who had taken a break from Facebook were happier, less lonely, less depressed than those who had used Facebook as usual, and by a pretty substantial margin. Those who stayed off of Facebook were also less likely to feel sad, angry, or worried. Twangy, in her book on iGen, she traces all of these key data points related to young people, especially college-age people, and mental health. Things like depressive feelings, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, all these important criteria in regards to a person's mental health. And what she discovers, she teaches psychology at the University of, I think, San Diego State. What she discovered in her research is starting at around the year 2012, there was this massive spike in almost every single criteria related to mental health. There was a massive spike in depressive thoughts or depressive feelings, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. Like there was this massive spike, especially among young girls. And through her research, what she concludes is this spike in mental health problems, it can't totally be attributed to smartphones, but it can be, at least in part, attributed to the fact that this is the first generation that grew up with a smartphone. They grew up with social media during their most formative years, their most vulnerable years. They spent those years on social media, always connected. And the results have been devastating. Again, largely on young girls, on young boys as well, but it seems to impact girls in kind of a different way. And her conclusion was, if you were to give advice for a happy life, it would be straightforward. Put down the phone, turn off the computer or iPad, do something, anything that does not involve a screen. So this is an expert who's studied the impact of digital technology, especially on young people. And what she's saying is, we have a mental health crisis among Generation Z. And a lot of this mental health crisis can be attributed to too much screen time. And so I think about what we've done to our kids over the last year, and I'm just appalled that we seem to have forgotten this really important lesson. And so we've placed kids, even young kids, in front of screens all day long, and we've become blind to the impact that that's going to have. And so Jean Twangy is out there ringing the alarm, like we need to rein in our screen time because it's having devastating effects on our mental health. See, what we do is when we're already sad or when we're already anxious, we've become trained, we've become habituated to go to our phones to sort of pacify those feelings of sadness, those feelings of anxiety. We think that by going to our phones, we'll feel better. But the problem is the opposite effect happens. We go to our phones to feel better, and it ends up making us feel worse. Imagine being a teenage girl and, it's a Friday night. You're alone at your house. You're in your bedroom. You're sad that you're alone at your house. You feel like a loser. So you go on your phone to kind of feel better. You go to Instagram, and the first thing that you see on Instagram is you see that girl at your school. She's perfect in every way. She has the right clothes. She has the right look. She has the right hair. She's hanging out with the right people, and she's out living her best life on Friday night. Meanwhile, you're there stuck at your house without anywhere to go, seems like without any friends in the world. And all of a sudden, your social media experience has made you feel significantly worse than you did before, because you've gone there, and what's happened is you've compared your experience to someone else's fake experience that they broadcast online, and you compare your real experience with their fake experience, and you wonder why you feel depressed. You wonder why that makes you feel anxious. Here's another kind of person that our tech creates: a disenchanted person. This picture I'm going to have to explain the background on this. This is from the Instagram page for the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. So if you go to the Instagram page for the Berlin Holocaust Memorial, you will see dozens of pictures very similar to this one. People come to the Berlin Holocaust Memorial from all over the world, and what they do is they pose. They take pictures to put on their Instagram with themselves front and center. There is nothing in this picture that speaks to the sacredness of the site. There's nothing solemn about this picture. This picture is superficial. This picture is narcissistic, but that's social media disciples us to be superficial. It disciples us to put ourselves at the center. The way that I put it is, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But when you're a smartphone, everything looks like a social media post. The fact that we live our lives every day with smartphones, with access to social media, with access to a camera, this has turned every waking moment into an opportunity to broadcast something about ourselves. And so there are no sacred moments anymore. When everything is public, when everything is put out there for public consumption, nothing is sacred. So we put everything out there. And I don't want to make fun of anybody, but we put engagement videos out there. We put sonogram pictures out there. We put, we create hashtags for our weddings. Like we do everything that we do now is done with social media in mind. That what we pick out on a menu at a restaurant, we pick, or some people pick, with social media in mind. How can I broadcast this later on out to the world? And so there are no sacred or special moments anymore. There are no private moments. Everything is public. And what happens is we become disenchanted. We become very superficial. Everything is superficial. Everything is about how it looks. Nothing is really real. Like, you think about what Instagram allows us to do. Instagram allows us to do two things that are artificial. It allows us to edit what we put out there. So we pick and choose, what do we want the world to see? It also allows us to filter whatever pictures we choose. So we create this artificial image of ourselves. And in the process, that artificial image of ourselves works backwards and shapes us into that artificial image. So we long to be like that artificial picture rather than being real, rather than being authentic. We also are defensive because of technology. This is a headline from several weeks ago now. There was a teenager in Tennessee. As a freshman in high school, she created a video, and in the video, she was quoting she was singing along to a song that unfortunately had a racial slur in it. And so she made this video and repeated the racial slur because it was in the song. Well, flash forward to when she's a senior in high school, and she's applying for colleges. She was accepted to go to the University of Tennessee under a cheerleading scholarship. And when she was accepted to the University of Tennessee, one of her classmates, who had been holding on to that video for 4 years, released that video publicly, causing her to lose her scholarship and lose her ability to go to the University of Tennessee. So a video that she made when she was 15 years old, singing the words of a song, cost her a chance to pursue her dream at the University of Tennessee. And a lot of teenagers, especially, are living very defensive lives because there's a certain imperative that comes with social media. If social media exists, we feel like we have to use it, right? We have to post something. We have to say something. We have to say something about what's going on in the world. Like, social media encourages the hot take. It encourages to be as quick as possible, to be as superficial as possible. And so it creates this imperative to share. If social media exists, we have to share. That's what we feel like anyway. But as we share, we're also terrified that what we share might come back to haunt us, that somebody might use what we share to hurt us, to abuse us. So a teenager lives in this really frustrating tension of like, I know I have to share everything, but I'm worried if I share something, will people hate me? If I share something, will people still like me? If I share the wrong thing, will I get canceled? Like there's this defensiveness that comes along with our addiction to social media. Also, we live disintegrated lives. There is this new, I don't know what you would call it, this new tendency called, I think it's a mental illness, to be honest with you, but it's called Snapchat dysphoria. Snapchat dysphoria, and what it is people, primarily women, but people wanting to look in real life the way that their Snapchat filters look on their phones. And so there are plastic surgeons now that advertise the ability to get plastic surgery to look like a Snapchat filter. And what this demonstrates, I'm laughing, it's actually pretty sad, but what this demonstrates is that we've lost the thread of what our identity really even is. We have a disintegrated identity. We struggle to know who we really are. And so the way that this is sometimes put is that we have a buffered identity. We're constantly in the world trying to make sense of who we are. We're constantly in the world trying to reframe who we are, how we understand ourselves, how other people understand us. And social media has made this worse because we create this image of ourselves and we put it out there, and we feel like we have to live up to that image or change ourselves to fit this image of the artificial person that we've created. And so we, in other words, what I'm saying is we're very confused. Social media has made us very confused about what our identity actually is. We also are disconnected. We're increasingly disconnected. And that's the picture I wanted to show for that. We're increasingly disconnected. This is, I know it just looks like ink blots, but this is a study that was done, I believe, at NYU. But they did a study on Twitter, and they wanted to identify, they were trying to see if whether or not partisan perspectives, either on the right or on the left, they were wanting to see how much those partisan perspectives actually overlapped with each other. So in other words, how much are right-wing people and left-wing people actually interacting online, on Twitter specifically. And this is what they discovered. They discovered that right-wing Twitter and left-wing Twitter almost never interact. If they do interact, they only interact for the purpose of mockery or argumentation. So there are two very distinct bubbles that exist on Twitter. There's a left-wing bubble and there's a right-wing bubble. Now, digital technology, one of the things that digital technology is advertised is that it will connect us, right? It'll connect us to each other. That digital spaces provide this opportunity for all these people. It's sort of a reversing of the Tower of Babel. That in digital spaces we'll be able to come together in new and creative ways and interact with people that we would never otherwise get to interact with. But the reality is that digital technology has done the reverse. Digital technology has created tribes. It has created separation from one person to the next, from one group to the next. So it's actually created a very disconnected experience. And it's also caused us to put more stock in our online network of associates instead of those people who are physically in proximity to us every day. So we spend more time engaging the virtual world than we do spend engaging the real world. Sherry Turkle, who wrote a book called Alone Together, which is a really good book. She talks about teenagers at parties. First of all, the average 12th grader today, and this is pre-COVID, but the average 12th grader today goes out with friends about as much as the average 8th grader about 20 years ago. So teenagers just aren't going out. They're not congregating with each other. And again, this was pre-COVID. They're not being with each other in nearly the same ways that students were with each other before digital media. And the reason why is because they're spending time in their bedrooms, texting each other, being on social media, doing all sorts of different things. My daughter, for instance, she watches Netflix shows in her room with other friends watching the same Netflix show at their houses, and that's how they interact with each other. And so Sherry Turkle in her book says some of that's okay, but really the negative thing about that is that so many times we're actually choosing the virtual instead of choosing the personal. So she'll talk about like college students being at a party together and actually seeking out quiet corners of the house so that they can actually remove themselves physically from other people just for the purpose of getting on their phone and spending some quiet time on their phone. So they're physically choosing the virtual instead of the physical. So it's leading to a very disconnected type of social experience. Here's the last point. Digital technology is also making us digitized people. This is from a website. It's called, you can look up the website if you just type in The Quantified Self. The Quantified Self is an international community of users and makers of self-tracking tools who share an interest in self-knowledge through numbers. If you're tracking for any reason, to answer a health question, achieve a goal, explore an idea, or simply because you're curious, you can find help and support here. The whole idea of Quantified Self is that you know yourself through numbers. You know yourself through data. So basically, the premise of the Quantified Self is that we are essentially machines. And the way you know yourself isn't through rumination and reflection. The way you know yourself isn't through traditional avenues like religion or even philosophy. The way that you know yourself is through data. So things as basic as your resting heartbeat, or how many steps you took in the previous day, how many calories you ate on average over the last week. This is how you really come to know yourself. You really come to know yourself through data. And so this makes sense, though. This makes sense. If your whole world is spent online, if your whole world is spent being plugged into digital technology, eventually you're going to come to see the world through the lens of digital technology. You're going to come to see your own identity as being digitized, for more or less. You know, on one level, I'm a big baseball fan, and I see this happening in a sport like baseball, where baseball now is mostly about numbers. It's about statistics. It's about analytics. And baseball's always been a little bit about statistics. But now the whole game is basically governed by data. The whole game is governed by analytical tools. So the computer is actually working backwards, affecting the game. I was listening to a podcast recently on the NBA, and they were talking about the problem in the NBA right now one of the problems is the instant replay is just slowing down the game. So especially towards the end of the game, they're stopping all the time to do instant replay to make sure they get the calls right. And what the podcast host said just shocked me. He said, well, nobody likes this. Nobody likes the fact that the game, the flow of the game is interrupted, that we're always stopping for a review of every single play. Like, nobody likes this. But he said, but this technology exists, so I guess we have to use it. And that's the assumption of digital technology, that we have to see our lives from the vantage point of the technology itself. So we don't critique the technology. We don't put it on a shelf. No, we have to see everything about who we are from the vantage point of our tools that we use. So we come to look like our technology. We come to look like our tools. Now, this leads to the last really important question that I'm going to ask. And then if you have questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. The natural question is, well, how should we live then? How should we live? Should we just throw our phones in the trash? Should we all just get off of social media? A lot of people have that perspective that we should just vacate these digital spaces. I don't actually share that perspective. I remain on social media for some complicated reasons. First of all, I enjoy various aspects of social media. That's where I get a lot of my news, to be honest with you. I like interacting with different people that I can only interact with on social media. There are certain things that I do like about social media. I also think that social media has become, especially for the students that I work with, for teenagers, just in general, digital spaces have become what sociologists call a third place. So your first place is your home. Your second place is either your school or your work, so the place where you spend the most time outside of your home. A third place could be a coffee shop. It could be a church. It could be a park. Those are all third places. Third places are places where people gather together and converse and socialize, and these are third places. And for so many teenagers, digital spaces have become those third places. And during COVID, digital spaces have actually become a second place for many people. And so from my perspective as a professor, as a leader in the church, like, I don't want to vacate those digital spaces, because that's where the people I minister to, that's where they're living, that's where they're at. So I've got to understand kind of that world. I've got to some degree or another live in that world so that I can speak into it. So I don't want to vacate those spaces altogether. I think that's a reactionary approach that Christians should probably avoid. Now, there might be reasons and occasions to leave social media. There might be personal reasons that why a person needs to do that. But I'm saying in general, I'm not anti-technology. I'm not anti-smartphone. I'm not anti-social media. But we do need to, first of all, think about these technologies. And hopefully that's what I've done over the last 40 minutes or so, is cause you to at least have some thoughts, to think critically about, do I like the person that I'm becoming because of this digital technology in my life? So Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10, one of my favorite passages, he says, we need to take every thought captive and bring it into submission to Christ. Part of taking every thought captive in our context means we need to think critically about digital technology and how it's discipling us, and maybe discipling us in ways that are contrary to our discipleship in Christ. So first of all, think, use your brain. Secondly, I would encourage you to work inward from virtue to technology rather than the other way around. So when it comes to virtues, we could think of passages like Galatians 5:22 and 23, the fruit of the Spirit. This is what Christian virtue looks like. And so what I mean by work inwardly from virtue to technology is basically this. We ask ourselves the question, how would a person who is manifesting love, for instance, how would that person use social media? How would a person who's manifesting self-control, how would that person use their smartphone? A person who's manifesting kindness in their lives, how am I going to treat the people that I interact with online? So we work inward from our established virtues, and we allow those established virtues to actually affect the way that we live our lives online. And this is the same is true. Listen, I mean, I'm not saying anything that's new here. Think about your workplace, your place of business. Hopefully you work from the virtues of the Christian life into that setting, into that business setting. Or if you're in school, you work from your virtues into that school. So you don't work from your school outward to reshape your virtues. You allow your virtues to reshape your experience as a student in school. And so I'm saying that we do the same thing when it comes to our online experience. Don't treat your online experience as being separate or disconnected from your life and discipleship as a whole. Here's another thing to think about. Digitally unclutter your life. You don't have to do everything that the world is doing. You don't have to post on every single issue. You don't have to be glued to or addicted to your smartphone or your tablet. You can choose to digitally declutter your life. There's a book that I recommend here by Cal Newport. It's called Digital Minimalism. This is a book that I have some of my students work through, and it just walks them through the process of digitally decluttering their lives. So not getting rid of technology altogether, but making strategic and temporary moves in their life to declutter, and then filling that space. Here's the critical thing. When you digitally declutter, you say, well, I'm going to take this month and I'm going to go off of social media this month. What Cal Newport says is, when you do that, what's important is that you fill that space with something else that builds you up, that's edifying, something else that you enjoy doing. So if you take a step away from social media, lean into maybe a hobby that you've neglected for too long. Lean into doing something physical, exercising that you've maybe been neglecting too long. So fill that space with other different things that you enjoy. And then after that period of decluttering, you could start to add technology back into your life, but it's now under better control. It doesn't dominate your life in the way maybe that it did previously. And here's the other thing. When I'm talking to teenagers, especially, what I tell them is unsharing is the new teenage rebellion. Choose the real over the virtual. And a part of that is choose those moments, those people, those places that are going to be sacred for you in your life. These are no phone zones, no post zones. Like, keep some things about yourself sacred. Keep some things about your relationships sacred. There is no imperative to this digital technology. You don't have to share everything. You don't have to post everything. You can choose those sacred moments and those sacred people and those sacred places, and you can keep those places sacred by not allowing technology to interfere with what happens there. So these are just some of my ideas. I would also just add one more thing. I always tell people, because every family is going to be different, every individual is going to be different. So what I tell people is have the technology talk as a family. I even tell parents, having a technology talk might actually, in our day and age, be as important as having the sex talk. I'm serious about that. Like, talking to your kids about social media, talking to your kids about the dangers of smartphones and the addictive tendency of some of this technology. Like, having that talk is just as important, I believe, as having the sex talk. There is one study that was done on Barna. I didn't put it on my slides here. I maybe should have, but in Barna, the book Faith for Exiles, one of the things that they discovered in their research, they were trying to identify the difference between Christians who, young Christians who wandered away from their faith. They called these prodigals. And Christians who were resilient in their faith. They wanted, the whole purpose of the book is, we want to understand what is the difference between Christians who wander and Christians who are resilient and growing in their faith. And the whole book is worth a read. It's called Faith for Exiles. But one of the questions that they asked in doing their research and doing their survey was, to what extent have you received instruction about the proper use of technology from your church? To what extent have you received instruction about technology from your church? 50% of resilient disciples received some sort of instruction about technology from their church. So their youth minister, their preacher, in a church setting, somebody was talking about technology. Prodigal Christians, those who wandered away, it was 8%. So 50% versus 8%. And what I'm saying is, this has to be a topic that we're talking about. This has to be a topic that we're talking about as families. It has to be a topic that we're talking about as churches. And a person's discipleship might actually depend on this. And this is one of the things too. If you're watching this, I would love to be a resource for you, to even if it means doing another webinar like this, or even coming to your church to actually talk through some of these issues, especially with your parents, with your youth leaders, because this is a conversation that we need to have. So I'm going to stop there, I think. We have, I think, about 10 minutes left. If there are any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. I'm going to stop sharing right here. And then, yes, so if there are any questions that you have, you could put them in the chat, and I'll respond to them. And and here's a question from Natalie Kors. I know Natalie from way back when. How's it going, Natalie? So she asked the question: given the distracted, defensive, et cetera, state of students from teens to college, do you believe they're equipped to actually think critically about these technology choices, understanding what is sacred? If the church or families are not teaching it, are faculty responsible to teach it in class, bringing students up to speed? Yeah, you're asking a lot there. First of all, I'm not going to take it for granted that students are aware of that they're specifically aware of what the problems might be. Now, I have found that at least among my students, they have a feel for this. Like they feel like things are not quite the way that they should be. And this is just my students. I don't know, Natalie, I know you work with college students as well. I don't know if this is universal or not, but when I talk to my students, there is some, they're aware of the warning signs. They're aware that technology, it's changing the way that they interact with each other. They don't like what they see in other people, and they don't like what they see in their. So there's this feeling of concern that they have, but it's vague. They don't exactly know how to articulate it or how to identify it. So I see my role as kind of walking them through that, kind of putting some words to this feeling that they have and giving them some tools to use technology well. So yeah, I think that is a part of our role. And I think churches, this is one of those specific issues in churches that we need to be intentional about talking about. If I always talk about when I sit down on Sunday morning for worship, I 9:30 every Sunday morning, we're usually in like our second song of worship, and my phone buzzes. And at 9:30 every Sunday morning, I'm told how much time I've spent on my cell phone that previous week. And it's always a convicting message to get, because you realize, oh, I've spent that much time every day just staring into a glowing rectangle. How could that possibly be? And so every Sunday, I'm reminded of this counter formation that's going on in my life, where I'm being formed and shaped by this technology. I think if you're a religious leader, if you're a youth minister, if you're a preacher, if you're a D group leader, whatever, like, you need to actually talk about these issues, because this is the world that your people are living in. My wife leads a D group of high school sophomores. And so they took in one of their D group times a few weeks ago, they just spent the entire time watching The Social Dilemma on Netflix. That's what they did as a D group with all these teenage girls. And because my wife and the other ladies that she leads with, they just felt this conviction, like, all of our girls, they're on social media all the time. They're on Snapchat, they're on Instagram all the time. They need to actually hear some clear teaching about the dangers and the risks of this technology. And it was really good. It was a really good thing. So we need to be doing more of that for sure. College professors, teachers, leaders in the church, and also in our families as well. And parents, I would just encourage you, and believe me, I struggle with this as much as anybody else. We've got to model the type of behavior that we want to see in our kids. And I don't have the study in front of me, but I'll just paraphrase. In one study, it found that over 50% of American teenagers, when they were asked, are your parents routinely distracted by phones in the midst of a conversation, they answered affirmatively. So our kids recognize that we have many of the same problems with a cell phone addiction that they do. And so we're in this together. We've got to model this type of behavior to our kids. Here's a question from Eric Maddox. Hey, Eric. As a youth minister, I feel like our students hear a lot about the dangers of smartphones. The problem I run into, though, is an unwillingness to actually take any steps towards dealing with the problem. This is probably due to the legitimate addiction to it that they're battling. Any ideas on how to make limiting technology appealing to students? So I have a couple ideas on this. First of all, my presentation has been mostly on the negative side, but again, I'm remembering back to when I was a high school student back in the 90s, and the approach that was taken with me when it came to things like secular music and stuff like that. The approach that was sometimes taken was a very hostile approach. We need to get rid of all of your secular music. We need to burn your CDs, crush your tapes. We need to get rid of that. And that's not really an effective strategy. It wasn't an effective strategy then. It's not an effective strategy now. So just warning students about all the dangers of social media and smartphones, you're right, Eric. That's not necessarily going to be effective. You might have students that respond momentarily or in a season, making some changes, but those changes won't be permanent, and those changes won't lead to any sort of long-term gains. And so we need to help students to develop habits that can be maintained and cultivated over time. And that's why I think one of the approaches that I would take is, rather than demonizing social media or demonizing their smartphone, try to give them positive habits and positive virtues to develop. And, one of the things that I've done in my class is try to get students to engage in certain activities that can't be done on a smartphone. Like to re-engage, for instance, in handwriting a letter, to play a board game, to go on an hour-long walk without your phone. So in other words, you're trying to replace bad habits with good habits, rather than just demonizing a smartphone, demonizing social media. You want to give students an image, a picture of what goodness can look like. And it's hard. It's a challenge, because these technologies, like I said, they are so pervasive and we are so addicted to them. But just gradually over time, we need to introduce positive habits in their place. And also we need to make sure, we need to make sure that as youth ministries, as churches, we're not solidifying bad habits, I think, and this is just Chad talking, this is just my opinion, but I think if you're doing youth ministry today, you need to intentionally engage students. You need to call students to physical presence in a community together. You've got to be careful about creating the type of youth ministry that is so digital and so online and so social media that you're engaging students in this virtual world, but you're not actually giving them opportunities to see that there's another way to live. And so in youth ministry, make sure, like I told my youth minister this months ago, I said, never apologize. That's what I told him. Never apologize for doing something as quote unquote unspiritual as a fifth quarter after a football game. Never apologize for that. Because what I know about kids today is that they are desperately in need of those moments where they physically can be in each other's presence. Like that, we as a church need to reflect on, what do we have to offer that the world doesn't have to offer, rather than just repackaging everything that we do in the way that the world kind of packages things. So David asked this, you mentioned that many churches are sorting out what to do with their online presence that they built during COVID. What do you see as some keys for churches to do online effectively? Great question. And churches are trying to figure that out. I'll be honest with you. Colleges are trying to figure that out too. We're all kind of trying to figure that out together. I read one college administrator from, it wasn't even a Bible college. I don't remember where it was, but she was saying it feels like we've kind of let Pandora out of the box with this streaming technology. And now we're wondering how to put how to put all that back in the box. And I don't know if it's that extreme or if it's that dramatic, but I think a lot of organizations are struggling through that question. And I know a couple things, or I think I know a couple things. I don't think that the digital online experience is going away. That toothpaste is out of the tube. And so most churches that I've talked to have told me, no, we're going to keep doing it. It's served a particular purpose, particular time, and we're going to keep doing it. We already have the technology. We already have the infrastructure. So we're going to keep doing it. But then the follow-up is, but we're not really sure what to do with it. We're not really sure how to call people back into physical worship. And so here's where I am with this. I think digital worship services can be effective to a limited degree, in the same way that televised worship services can be effective to a limited degree. I think they can serve as bridges, but I don't think that they serve well as destinations. So I think churches that continue to offer online services You need to offer them almost evangelistically that this might be a first step to a person that either can't come to church or won't come to church for various reasons, but offer those services as a bridge to a robust physical community of believers. So a bridge, not a destination. And I know even while I'm saying that that's easier to say than it is to do. I have a friend out in another state, other part of the country. They're really leaning hard into small groups right now in ways that they never have before, as a way to sort of capitalize on both the digital moment and also to call people in kind of a small group atmosphere. So they're leaning into small groups, worshiping together online, and it's been fairly successful for them. I don't know that would be successful for everybody. But those are the two things that I know. I know that the technology is not going away. And I also know that we need to figure out ways to turn this digital service into a bridge and not a destination, because for too many people, it's becoming a destination. And I don't think this is sometimes controversial to say, but I don't think an online church is the same thing as being the church. I think that there's certain things that are intractably physical about our communion and fellowship with each other that can't be duplicated online. And I think just personally, we need to have the courage to actually say that. And so it's a bridge, not a destination. It doesn't look like there's any other questions. I think if that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. I do appreciate you participating and listening to me go on and on about this topic. If you have any other questions in the future, don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email is ragsdale.chad@occ.edu. Just drop me an email and I'd love to respond the best way that I can. Thanks.